It's 6:02 on Tuesday, March 23rd, and I am calling the Finance Committee meeting to order. First order of business is the meeting minutes from March 16th.
I'll make a motion to
Accept the minutes.
Second.
So David made the motion and Peter seconded. Any discussion? Okay, we'll take a roll call vote. We're going to start with David.
Aye.
Peter?
Aye.
I don't see you.
He's just logging. Yeah.
That's-
Turn on my camera.
No, that's fine. You're over here.
My computer's not turning on.
Darren?
Ross, aye.
Ted?
Purcell, aye.
Tommy's here. He can't log in. So Tommy, what's yours?
Aye.
Tommy is yay, and Karen Narwhal, yay, unanimous. Next on the agenda is the meeting minutes from March 18th.
Make a motion.
Accept the minutes from March 18th.
Second motion.
Okay, so Dave made the motion, Pete seconded the motion. Any discussion? Okay, roll call vote. Tommy?
Aye.
Tommy is an aye. David?
Aye.
Peter?
O'Malley, aye.
Ted?
I read his lips, it was aye.
Purcell, aye.
Darren?
Ross, aye.
And Karen Narwhal, aye, unanimous. Okay. First discussion this evening is the Conservation Commission. Okay, Peter, it's all yours.
Thank you very much. Here, let me adjust my camera a little bit. The conservation is funded flat from the general fund from last year. I believe the only general fund is the appropriation is the $400 for, oh gosh, I don't remember that one account, Ron.
It's conservation purchase services.
Purchase services, that's right.
That's $450. Commission supplies 100 and Conservation Commission 500, Peter. That's the dues stuff.
Right.
The purchase services, you say that's the dues.
No.
Yes.
The last one is the dues.
Well, we use,
No?
actually, is that
That's-
purchase services is the one that comes out of the general fund?
All of this comes out of the general fund.
No, you're right. Purchase services, Karen, you're correct, is the membership dues in professional organizations. Karen, you're right.
So Peter, what is the membership dues per year for you guys?
Gosh, I wish Tamika were here right now because she could answer that question. Once a year, we all vote to just pay it and it goes off. So honestly, I don't remember.
And how much, so you don't know how much the email address is either?
No, I haven't gotten a bill for that one yet.
Okay,
They have a bunch of money.
they pay for, that's why there's no salaries. The salaries all get paid out of the wetlands.
That one.
Yep,
Right.
that's why, that's how
Everything
that.
else comes out of the wetlands fund right now, yes.
If you could just let us know, send us an email.
Glad to.
You can send it to Tamika and she can send it to us. That's fine. Just let us know what the dues are and what the email address is, just so we have it. That's all.
All right, I'll be happy to.
Any other questions?
Not for this year. So I've clued in Karen already that some things are changing in conservation. So let me just fill you in on things that are going to happen, not this year, not FY22, but they're not very far away behind that. Joe and I have been talking about some of the stormwater permitting issues that we need to deal with in this town, and there are certain skills that conservation has that are ideal for some of the stormwater work, specifically around setting up erosion controls, which will be a much bigger deal now that virtually everybody every construction project is going to need them. And maintenance, not just maintenance, but surveillance, post-construction evaluation, all of that needs to be done, and conservation already has the skills to do it. And DPW has never been trained in this space and doesn't have anything. We had a conversation in conservation about it. We think overall it's a good idea. Conservation's begun to write its bylaw to enable it to do not only the wetlands work, but also this stormwater work. One of the side effects is that we are almost certainly going to need a conservation agent sooner rather than later so we can be proactive on more of these issues. My gut feel is that we can fund a conservation agent for a year, maybe a year and a half out of the conservation fund. But after that, we will have exhausted that fund. So we're going to need to pay not only the conservation agent, but also all the funds that we take from the conservation this year. So Tamika's salary and all those other funds that we use, we're going to need from the general fund for a year or more to replenish the wetlands fund so that we could pay for things out of that again. That is, as I said, our hope is that that we can hire a conservation agent in FY23. And so we need to be concerned with the general fund allocations in 24 to 25, depending upon how things go. Can I answer any questions?
Does anyone have any questions?
Is that something that might be served by a revolving account based on fees that projects cover?
All the fees today go into the wetlands fund, which is in effect a revolving account. It's just that what we're allowed to use those funds for is limited. And that's where things get a little tricky. So we can only use those funds for things related to the administration or enforcement of the Wetlands Protection Act.
Madam Chairman, may I comment, Chairwoman?
Sure.
So I'm not sure, and maybe Joe Buckley could help us with this, but if you're talking about work that is a result of federal law for stormwater, there's going to have to be a whole new fee structure for that. I'm just wondering if that fee structure, Joe, could pay for some of those costs when we get there for conservation work as it relates to stormwater.
Could I answer the town administrator's question through the chair?
Sure, go ahead.
I would just remind all of you, stormwater, the National Pollution Elimination Distribution System permit the town currently has is an unfunded mandate. And what it means is to comply with federal law and state law, it's got to come out of the general fund, or you have to come up with some other way to pay for it. The requirements of that program are only going to go up over the next 5 or 6 years. We have, I think I mentioned it briefly in the last meeting. We may want to look at some type of a stormwater utility. But unfortunately, there are no federal funds or no good, easy sections to tie to that process. We may actually have to create some.
A bigger discussion than here,
Yep.
Joe. That's
Much bigger discussion.
That's what I was referring to, that a lot of towns are setting up stormwater utility and creating a whole nother enterprise fund around that. And that's what I was actually asking, but that's just too big of a discussion for tonight.
Right, whether it becomes another utility, whether it becomes just another committee that we need to staff who does permitting and assesses fees. I don't have answers to that. We know we've seen it done several ways in several towns, and conservation is happy to be part of the discussion.
If it means anything, we heard from EPA as recently as last week, asking questions about some of our stormwater issues. They really do look.
Okay. Joe, you and I should probably get together soon and have another discussion about it and move forward. Since Concom is now starting on bylaws to enable us to do work, then we want to get this right the first time, obviously.
I hope that answers your questions. Karen, you all set?
I think so. Any other questions? Okay. Thanks, Pete. You're all set.
Thank you very much.
Okay. Next on the list, Joe, is water and sewer enterprise funds. Now, we got brand new pages sent to us in the email today.
Can I speak to that, please?
Yep, go right ahead.
All right, you got brand new pages, basically because the benefits for the enterprise supported staff, that those numbers weren't in at the time the original document was created per policy. We also didn't have all the borrowing information. So both of these sheets have been amended to reflect both borrowing and fringe accounts.
Nope, thank you.
The additional emails you received late in the day are backup data for that, if you really want to look at it.
I did look at it. That's the scary thing.
So we technically, if you don't mind, I'll continue. We technically have one enterprise. The DOR discussion, we were asked to at least maintain two separate budgets, and you have two separate budgets in front of you, water and sewer. I would remind everybody involved, we'll probably end up recommending a rate increase this summer, and that's decided by the Board of Public Works. We have yet to do that rate increase simply because we don't have numbers from the city of Worcester or DCR regarding transportation to the Upper Blackstone. So we were able to hold the line on rate increases throughout the pandemic, which I think I think we should be proud of that fact. That was no small task. The other thing I want to mention is we've had some recent collective bargaining agreements that were signed, and that's resulted in not rate increases, but rates of pay increase. And we've also had some recent turnover. As I mentioned in the last budget meeting, we are awaiting an updated letter report from Weston Sampson regarding staff, in particular for sewer. As far back as 2003, sewer was supposed to have 3 or 4 people on, full-time staff. We currently only staff sewer with part-time help. That may come out in the future as you work through more budget iterations. Do you need to go through this by line? I could probably talk about the bigger pieces directly.
Let's talk about the bigger pieces, and then if anyone has any questions, they can ask. How about that?
All right. Where would you like to start? You want to start with potable water?
Sure, sounds good.
Okay. So we have, it's a very straightforward budget. We have water wages at $222,747.20.
Now, that's an increase. Is that an increase in personnel or just pay increases?
It's both, frankly.
Okay,
We lost a key member of our staff who went to take a job in a nearby town.
okay,
And if I could just have a couple minutes, we also lost Steve Cannell, and
Yeah.
Steve passed away, as many of you are probably aware. Steve was somebody who had worked full-time in the water department for many years, and then came back and worked for the town part-time. And he actually saved the water enterprise a good amount of money over those years, because he was able to fill in some spots we would have otherwise had to have a full-time person doing. And when he passed on and the other member of the staff left, we had to hire a consultant to come in and run the plant. I called 2 or 3 different firms within the industry. I talked to R.H. White, I talked to Methuen, and I ended up with Weston Sampson. I just want to give you some numbers. R.H. White has 140 plus water operators in the field. They had no one available statewide to send to Rutland. Weston and Sampson was able to find one. And that person comes from the South Shore, whenever we need him to run the water plant. So he actually helped us out a great deal. And once we've got an open slot yet to fill, and getting someone with the appropriate licenses to meet what we're required to by DEP regulation to run that facility is no small task. So we're going to need another body. All right.
okay. So the numbers here for the water regular wages, that doesn't include the guy from Weston and Sampson. That must be included in the purchase services, correct?
That's not included in this budget at all. It was an
Okay.
emergency situation and it was actually paid for out of the reserve that was approved this spring.
Okay,
We had to have licensed operators on site. I called DEP and they were very, very specific about that. It was not feasible to have the chief water operator there 7 days a week.
Mhm.
Mind you, that facility does run 7 days and we had to have a backup. So we considered an emergency and used the reserve funds approved this spring. We have no intention of paying somebody to do that. We have 2 full-time operators at this time going forward. We're going to need the third to make sure that we're stable.
okay.
So you want to move on to administrative staff?
Yep, so those also would be the 2% COLAs,
Yep, those include 2% COLAs, yes.
okay?
Say
No new staff, though.
again, please?
No new staff?
No new staff.
Okay, great.
But what I can tell you is the clerical staff I do have at DPW, 60% of their time goes to water and sewer related issues. Water overtime and standby, pretty much level funded, that's 30,000. Purchase services, $32,600. Both of those accounts, both overtime and purchase services and supplies got wiped out this year with all the breaks we had. So in addition to this, I also proposed a $25,000 reserve in case. Obviously, we hope we don't have any more breaks, but you'd be better off to be prepared. Water, other expenses, a lot of that is simply licenses and additional training, long-term debt. I think I gave you documentation for that in that second late email.
You did?
Then we have water indirect charges. There's a breakdown for that also in the email. If you have questions about that, I can answer those. And then water benefit allocation, which we also sent along.
Okay. Any questions?
Yeah.
Just one comment. I'm sorry.
Hold on one second, Ron. I got Dave that's got a question.
Hey, Joe,
Hi,
just
Dave.
curious, on the filters, are they all repaired at this point? Were they, last year we had a big problem with those. Are those all fixed?
Yes, we had all 3 filters rebuilt. They're averaged about $50,000 a piece, but they've all been done. We estimate-
All 3 of them have been rebuilt,
I'm sorry?
and they just couldn't hear because I have to turn down my microphone in order to be heard. Yeah, long story, but ultimately I just repeated to him that you've fixed it.
We also put a lot of new water main in this year.
You put in how much new water main?
I said a lot.
Yeah.
I don't have an exact footage, but we did the worst pieces of the Inwood Road area. So probably a couple thousand feet.
Well, that'll last at least for another 150 years, right?
That design life is probably closer to 50, but it's good that you have such high hopes for the work.
Talk to the pipe and tell them that's what we need. Okay, so let's go on to sewer.
Mr. Purcell had a question
Karen.
also. I saw.
Oh, go ahead, Ted.
So if I'm looking at this, there's a $51,000 increase. Is that the money that you would cover by the rate hike? Is that why you're going to need a rate hike?
Two reasons on the rate increase. Rate hike is never a fun word.
Increase, gotcha.
The, we hired somebody to come in and do a rate study. And they recommended that we should be raising rates annually regardless, a certain amount. Our rates, our sources to pay water come from a couple different places. Most of it's rates, but some of it's also new construction. So I don't know exactly how much of that will be covered, that 51,000 will be covered that way, but yes. The rate increase will have to be used to cover those operating costs, yes.
You're awfully quiet over there. Okay, so let's move on to, let's go over to sewer.
Dirty water it is. The first line item is sewer fund salaries, which is $52,274.56. That covers 2 part-time staffers. And again, similar to what I said when I opened, I would caution you, grossly understaffed. There's 2 problems with that, namely, basic sewer maintenance isn't getting done. And if anything, since 2003 or so, the system's only gotten bigger. So that's a very conservative number, and that may have to go up in the short term. I'm still waiting on the results of the letter report.
Okay.
That's the most complicated issue, with the exception of the one that's highlighted on this list. Does anyone have any questions?
Because, yeah, you don't know. Any questions? All right.
Moving on, similar to water, it's a very similar budget. We have administrative staff that both mostly handle water and sewer billing. Any questions on those?
Just a question on just one quick one. What's the sewer benefit allocation? What's that mean? Just for my clarification, please.
It's a very good question.
It's this page, Darren, you received it today.
Darren, when you look at the regular highway budget, okay, you saw we had how we pay staff. This has the same thing on it. It's just because it's an enterprise account, we pay for their, like, a portion of their health insurance and dental through us. That's how it's, so that you actually see that on this budget. That's why it looks a little different. And that-
Okay, I kind of recall that the other night, but thank you very much.
Okay,
Darren, one of the things he sent us has all of the details. It's all listed.
Yep, I've got
Thank you,
that. I'm looking at it too.
okay, so moving along, we have sewer purchase services at $68,500. That can be anything from hiring a truck to come in and clean a pump station, to rewiring a pump station, to helping to fix a broken pipe. Supplies most often is pipe and related stuff, related pieces and parts. Sewer long-term debt, that is in the package I sent you late in the day. You can review, if you have any questions, let me know on that. As well as sewer principal debt payments. The big one here is sewer fund transportation and treatment. That's the biggest charge and the majority of this budget. That pays to transport wastewater out of Rutland through Holden and Worcester to the Upper Blackstone. And then the second part of that is the assessment that we pay the Upper Blackstone. I represent the town on the board of the Upper Blackstone, and their assessment is very close to what it was last year. There's been a minimal increase. They were able to refinance some debt and keep some numbers down. The other part of that bill, which is the single biggest bill we pay, I don't know. Worcester hasn't released rates yet, and ongoing discussions with DCR. So this bill is very variable and similar to water. We're looking at $100,000 increase, maybe more. And we won't know more until probably June or July.
Okay. Any questions?
Madam Chairwoman?
Yep, go ahead, Ron.
Yeah, just a comment to Joe. Hey, Joe, in your benefit allocation, I see you're using the 0.93%. That only happens if the AIC votes to reduce that. Otherwise, it's closer to 7%. So just
Okay.
keep that in mind, because that may have to be adjusted depending upon what happens at the AIC meeting. Thank you. That's all, Madam Chairwoman.
Okay, so now the sewer and water emergency reserve.
It should be $25,000 apiece. We'd recommend funding that through retained earnings. And I'll be frank with you, that saved us a couple times this season.
Because
Now,
it lets you,
we have capital plans in place to address the worst ones we saw in water. But I would advise that as long as the money is available in retained earnings, I'd put that aside for emergencies. Don't use it, but you never know.
okay? Any questions? Okay. Thank you, Joe. I think we're all set. Thank you very much. Appreciate
Have a good
it.
night, everybody. Be safe.
Good night, Joe. Thank you.
Thanks, Joe.
Yeah.
Okay, so now we have recreation and safe place.
Okay, before we get into the budget, I just kind of wanted to give a quick update as to where recreation is kind of as of today. Obviously, due to the pandemic, almost all rec programs were cut short last March, and most of them have not been able to reopen. Our two largest programs, Safe Place and Summer Fun, which generate the greatest amount of revenue for the rec department, have not reopened at all, obviously out of our control, either state mandates or district mandates about programs not being in the schools. And we really rely on the revenue from those programs, especially Summer Fun, to help operate other programs, other classes, and the pool. But with COVID numbers improving and state restrictions kind of being lifted, it seems like we're starting to see a light at the end of the tunnel. Last week, we finally received approval from the school district to be able to utilize Naquag as our home base for Summer Fun, which was huge. If we didn't receive that approval, we'd be in a very different spot right now. The revenue that we will generate from camp, some of that coming in immediately when we hold registrations, is vital for us to open up the pool, run the pool, and run and open up other programs as COVID numbers continue to improve and things get back to normal. The pool is also a huge factor in Summer Fun. Being such a sought after program, it kind of puts us a step up from other programs. A lot of other summer camps don't offer a daily swim option. So I think that's what helps us have such high numbers at camp, where we have waiting lists for every single week. So if you look at the 53D account budget submission form, for the revenue, I kept it the same prior to FY21. We didn't really factor that in. Obviously, most of our programs did not run, but the revenue, we kept it similar to previous years, although I honestly think our revenue this coming year will be a lot higher. Karina and I have both been inundated with phone calls, emails, Facebook messages, people wanting to know, when's camp opening? Is before and after school running? Are you going to start any other events or classes? So I think all of our programs will be at capacity with extensive waiting lists. So with our revenue being where it is, our expenses fall in line with that. For wages, we just put in the 2% cost of living increase. And then we did a slight increase for purchase services and supplies to just kind of go in line with everything increasing.
Do you have a spreadsheet showing what makes up the total revenues? Like this much comes from this much comes from this much comes from this? Or is it just?
Not right now, no.
Okay.
I can get that for you.
Yeah, that would be helpful because what are we looking at for summer fun because we've got $19,934.97 in the revolving fund, and the pool costs $41,000 to run and open, and that's not including Karina's stay.
With summer camp, we normally can take up to 75 kids per day.
Mhm.
And when we register, which we're hoping to do in April, every time a child registers, it's a $50 per child per week. And there's going to be 9 weeks of camp deposit. So that in itself should generate $20,000 to $25,000 right away. And then the remaining balance for camp, we usually see most of that come in at the end of May because parents receive a discount if they pay in full by June, and most of them choose to take that discount. So usually we end up bringing in about $150,000 with summer fun.
And what are the expenses attributed to that?
Let me see. We said about half of what we bring in are expenses. The remaining 50% remain in the revolving fund to use down the road for other programs that we run, not necessarily summer fun.
Okay, so then you've got 75,000-ish.
Yep.
That will go to help defer the cost of the pool.
Yes.
Okay.
Hey, Karen, just a comment to kind of bring you up to speed. So me and Sarah had met on all this to get ready for the bringing back of Karina. And one of the concerns that I had, and frankly, a couple of members of the board of selectmen had, is there's some concern about the pump and how long it will last at the pool. It's like a $10,000 expense. Karina and Sarah discussed it. They think that the pump will get us through another season, but it is getting old, so they were being kind of proactive about putting money aside to replace it. If things go as expected, we'll be okay through this year. And it's something we'll have to look at in the following year. But things, I mean, could go wrong, and we could have a problem with the pump. You know, we'll have to deal with it with existing funds within the revolving account.
So Sarah, I hope Ron told you that there are no funds to help pay for that.
Yep, no, we're aware of that.
If it goes, the pool would have to shut down, I guess.
Yep.
Okay.
And then as far as Safe Place, obviously we haven't been open since March 12th of last year.
Yep.
School was remote in the spring, school was remote in the fall. And then when the school district did go to hybrid in January, they were not allowing any outside programs to operate in the schools, and they are not doing that for the remainder of the school year. So I have been in contact with the principals at both Naquag and Glenwood, and they seem very hopeful that we will be able to operate as normal come September. They're hoping they'll be able to utilize the kids being back in school full-time April, May, and June to figure out what's working, what's not, what they need to do, so then they can tell us what we need to do on our end so we can resume normal operations. So I'm meeting with them middle to end of May to hopefully get a definite answer. And I'm hoping it's a go. And then I will have registration in June like we do every year. We start in June and it rolls throughout the summer until it starts in the fall.
And Madam Chairman, just to let you know that, you know, one of the reasons our decision upon, you know, allowing Karina to be laid off for a while is that the Safe Place Fund currently has a balance of 150 grand. So we can, you know, if that program is done, we have money to deal with that program. And we have room to kind of float a little bit. So I think we're going to be in good shape. But that was another thing that me and Sarah reviewed to make sure we were comfortable for the year that we'd be in position to move that revolving account and that activities forward.
Right. Okay,
And then the budget submission form for the Safe Place account, I base the revenue on that off of us running at full capacity, because we always do. I can't increase that. I can't have more than 104 kids at any given time. We're not up in tuition for this coming year, so it should stay the same. Salaries and wages only increased by the 2% for COLA, and then everything else, again, minor increases just to, take into account just everything else going on.
okay. Any questions?
Nope. Nope.
Okay, well, thank you very much.
Thank you. Have a good night.
So I think the only thing that, well, we'll wait till we sit down and we talk about the whole budget, because I know I have some concerns about having recreation and Safe Place in the general budget. I think per what I'm seeing, revolving funds need to be authorized annually at town meeting. So I think by putting them in there, my belief is that we're muddying the waters, but we can have that discussion when we get to the final budget, but because we have to authorize the revolving funds, so.
Madam Chairman, before you adjourn, because I think that's next, right?
Yep, well, depending upon what other concerns come forth, yep.
Well, I just want to kind of talk about the timeline kind of going forward from where we're at now, right? So I think you're having another meeting Thursday, and is Tuesday your last meeting for departments?
Yes, April 1st will be our revenue review and going over the budget as a whole.
So April 1st, is it better then, because we've had a lot of discussion about setting up potential cuts and stuff, and I'll tell you what my concern is, at least I want to think about how we move forward, is that we all know that the school system is going to crank up their people to come out and vote for the school budget. And, we need to develop a plan kind of backwards from the date of the town meeting to what our plan is going to be and how we're going to present it to the town, I think, prior to town meeting, so that we have a chance to educate the public about what they may or may not want to do at town meeting. So can you kind of give me an idea of your timeline going forward? When do you plan on having a budget meeting to discuss cuts and, I guess, develop that plan?
Well, once we sit down and go through the budget as a whole and the revenue, go through the revenue and go through the budget as a whole on the 1st, then we can start at that point, look at it as a whole. We have to go through and finish discussing with all the rest of the departments so that we understand that. And from there, then that's when we look at the budget, and that's when we start talking about, well, where can we make cuts and what was discussed and all of that. So yes, it does take time.
No, I agree. And I don't have any objection to the time. I guess I'm saying the longer time we have for whatever plan that we move forward with, the longer the time we have to kind of sell our plan to town meeting, I think the better off we are. So, and that's why I was just wondering what the timeline was going to be. But I think we're going to have, everybody I talk to, selectmen, everybody is concerned that no matter what we do, we're not going to be able to sell at the town meeting and kind of compete against what the schools are going to do. So I think we've got to get our message out as soon as possible to have any chance at all at town meeting. That's my only concern.
Go ahead, Peter. Nope, you're still on. Yeah. It's just easier.
So, and this is primarily for the chair.
Yep.
But I was thinking about the efforts. I mean, you've been talking right along about the whole thing, about this is going to be hard.
Mhm.
And it is going to be hard. And I sat down, I just tried to put together real quick, just a little schematic that said,
Mhm.
these are things we need to be able to do And with the town meeting happening at a particular time,
Mhm.
and the fact that I think we're going to come up with some display that we can share with the town, and probably need to share that prior to town meeting. You know, maybe it's a video, maybe it's landmark in the paper, or something that would indicate the actions that need to get done. So as Ron was saying, there's a pretty good chance that the school budget, even if it doesn't pass here, there may be other towns that would not vote it down. So we're probably going to end up having to absorb that cost. So what does that mean, and how do we address that? How do we put that into a conversation or create the conversation for the town, so the town can have an informed decision that they can make at town meeting? And I mean, I didn't realize how much was going to be here that had to be done.
Mhm.
So I really think we should take a crack at proposing a timeline.
Well,
And I don't know if you need that in the motion, if you want me to.
well,
do
I
that.
think the only thing comes in where we're gonna be doing many iterations of the budget.
Right.
So we're gonna do one iteration with the school budget going through as a whole. And then maybe we as a committee, I can't say that that's how it's gonna be done, but maybe we make a decision that this is the school number that we can afford, and we do that budget.
Right.
And then we're going to have to do several iterations of this budget. And we will have to put together sheets for each one of the budgets to say, this is what will be cut. If you accept this, this is what you will lose. If you do this, you will only lose this. If you do this, you will only lose this.
All at cost.
Yeah, all at a cost, and we will need to put specifics.
And the thing that I'm concerned about, when we were meeting last week,
Mhm.
last Thursday with Joe, Joe made it a point to
Yes.
request
Yeah.
that if we get to the point where we're gonna do cuts.
Yep.
That the department heads be
Yes.
included, maybe not all of them, maybe just the big guys.
Yep.
So that's, I mean, it's not things that we did last year that I remember. Not where we had those cut discussions, because we never really got there. We manufactured the revenue.
Yeah, we fluffed the revenue.
That's right. So, that's
Yes,
right.
with the
And
state's
that's, and I'm okay with that. And I know, I mean, we're probably so far away from that now.
Well, we have to sit down as a whole,
Right.
as our whole group, and we have to sit down and go, like, do we take all the COLAs out? Do we take all the steps out? Do we do this? Do we do this? We have to decide that as a board.
Right.
And that would have to be, we have to go through the revenue. We have to make sure that we feel comfortable with the revenue.
Exactly.
So that's what April 1st is for. And then at that point, I would say at that point, when we're looking at those numbers,
Right.
I think at that point, we can put together pretty good, hey, listen, by next Tuesday, this is what we want to see, by next Thursday. But we haven't been able to see the whole thing yet, because we still haven't talked to some pretty major pieces of our budget.
Totally.
So that's the reason why I'm kind of pushing that off, because we have to wait till we sit down and we talk as a whole, when we're going over revenue, when we're looking at the budget. And at that point, then we can say, okay, so what do we want to do? What as a committee do we want to do?
Right.
And everyone's going to bring their own ideas to what we can do, and we'll have the open and honest discussion at that point.
I worked well under pressure. But I don't know if I worked that well under that much pressure. You know,
Well, we're going to be spending a lot of time together in the
Yeah, I
next
think
couple
so.
of months.
I think so too.
Oh, and the other thing that I had.
Yep.
Was just a real quick housekeeping thing. I had been, Ron and I had the conversation around getting files.
Mhm.
And I called him and
Yep.
He wasn't available at the time. So as I was waiting for him to call back, I went back and I looked at what I was doing. And what I was doing last year, I was using the spreadsheet that we got from Mike
Mhm.
and you have now.
Mhm.
And I was using that to be able to analyze what I thought was going on in the budgets.
Mhm.
I guess I don't really need all of those electronic copies of stuff. You have the the spreadsheet,
Yes.
and if we need it. I
Well,
mean,
we're gonna need it because we're gonna be using that as
Yeah.
to see where we're headed. So yes.
Okay,
But that will be April 1st.
Right.
And truthfully, guys, I'm gonna just tell you flat out, I think it's gonna be better if we're all sitting in a room.
right.
We're all sitting in a room. We can have the computer for people who are from the public, but I think the finance committee is gonna be better if we're all sitting in a room.
I would,
Because there's gonna be a lot of discussions back and forth, and I think it's gonna be more conducive than trying to look up here and see and make sure and all of that, so.
I agree.
so, Karen, if I could just, I'm trying to put the pieces of this together in my mind to get prepared, because obviously whatever we do, we're gonna have to put on the warrant, right? And as you discuss various options, I'm trying to think of what articles would look like, right? Because if we were to give different options to town meeting, I would think that the warrant has to be set up in such a way as that it makes articles to do different things, correct? So I guess I'm kind of wondering, and I think that's something I just want to put on your agenda, on your discussion level, is not just about making the numbers, it's about how we presented the town meeting in the form of various articles, and I was kind of puzzled how we might do that, but
Well,
Something
we
we
do
have
the
to think about.
schools. We do the school. And what happens at the school level decides what everything else is. We put the warrant is done in generic. It's not until the motions are made that night
Right.
that everything is changed. Because at that point, that's what has to change depending upon what the floor has voted.
So I don't know what the floor will do, but is setting up the warrant, I'd like to put the school budget behind the town budget and try to make them stay so that the people that are voting on the school budget understand the tough issues we're gonna have to face if we give them that money. Now, I guess in theory, they could make a motion to change the order of the warrant, but I think when we develop that warrant, we put them behind the town budget and make them stay instead of just
We
voting.
can have that discussion when we're sitting down and discussing the budget as a whole, but we can tell you what we've done in the past and what has been successful and what hasn't been successful. And the last thing you want to have to do is pass one warrant, then go to the next and not have it go the way you hoped it was going to go, then have to go back and recall that other warrant article because it's not accurate anymore.
Yeah, unfortunately, I agree with what Ron's trying to do,
Yep.
but no matter what we do, if you put the school at the end and it passes, we're screwed.
Right. We have to
That,
go
like
through
what Karen just said, Ron, and I think it's better for us after doing this for 30-something years, going to these town meetings. You gotta take the biggest bite first and deal with the pain after that. Because if we go the other way, I don't disagree with your theory, but the townspeople, you may have a better chance of having a vote to reconsider than you're gonna have to do what you want to do your way. And you're not even gonna have you're gonna have a slim chance of that too. And I don't want to go into this thing thinking that that's a route that we should have, but it's not gonna be an easy process. It's,
Well, I don't think, Darren, that any process is gonna be easy as this town meeting goes. I was just thinking that how do people vote against the school budget if they don't know the ramifications on the town budget? That's why I kind of thought that it would make sense to let them.
Which
see the
is
pain.
why we will have something in writing that will be in a handout that says, if you vote for the school budget at this number, this is what you will lose. And
Okay.
we will have that because we will need to have that. And that is every single department will need to tell us when we decide how it's going to roll out to them, to whether it be $1 or whether it be a percentage. When they make their cuts, they have to tell us what it is so that we can write it down.
Hey,
Whether
Karen,
it be you're losing 40 hours, whether you're using 20 hours, whether you're losing 3 people, whatever, they have to tell us so that we can have that to give as a handout that says, if you vote, and that would be something that once we get that, that's something that we can put up on the town website and say, if you vote for the school budget the way this is what you will lose.
and Karen, to that point, I think that's excellent because you know, the people who have the most to lose in this issue are the town employees. So if we can get that information to them prior to town meeting where they can start getting their friends and their family and the people that support them.
It's not just, town employees will lose, but it's also the town's folks
Yeah.
will also lose because they're gonna lose services. Yes, I agree that the town employees are definitely gonna lose, but the town folk, the taxpayers are gonna lose services. And that's the one thing we have to quantify and get out to the taxpayers so that they know to come to the meeting and get it all squared away.
And Karen, I agree with you, but the town employees could lose jobs and that hurts really, really painful. So I agree with your premise. It's everybody, but the
Yeah.
town employees, they need to know that they could lose their jobs as a result of this discussion. So, but I understand your point and hopefully we can get something we can kind of explain to everybody, townspeople, employees all at once.
Is there any benefit, Karen, through the chair, and I don't, but this is just I don't know the answer, to postponing the town meeting till be the last one in the group of the 5? Is there any benefit to that? And I don't know if we can do that, but I just wonder if there's a benefit to doing that.
That is something that we could bring up at that point. I mean, because yes, there is some benefit to that, because at that point, we would know what else is happening. And then we'd
Right.
have a little bit of an idea so that we're not having to go through 12 different budgets on the night of the floor. I get that.
We also could be setting precedent for the other towns.
Right, but like David just said, we could also be setting precedent. If we don't pass it, maybe one of the other towns might say, hey, listen, Rutland did it, so maybe we can do it too.
Or if we push out our meeting, they need to be pushing out theirs.
Right. I mean, so yeah, we have to figure that all out.
Yeah.
And we have to, I mean, we need to, all I can say is at this point, everybody kind of look at your budgets, look at them, see what you're doing, see what you're seeing, and we've got to just really take some hard numbers and look and see what we're going to have to do. But that will be after we do the revenue on the 1st.
But I don't, just for discussion, I don't think Rutland has ever gone last in the parade of meetings. Maybe Tommy's been around a little longer than me, but I don't remember that ever happening, Tommy. Do you? I just wonder if it's a different strategy. I'm throwing it out there that we might want to try.
Tommy doesn't remember us ever being the last one, but that's not to say we couldn't do it. Go ahead, Ted.
I think I remember last year for about a week, we were the last meeting and then someone else said, oh, we're going to go after Rutland.
That's right.
Exactly.
You know, we could end up with 5 meetings on May 30th or whatever the last day is. So
Right.
there's something to it, but I don't think it's anything we can hang our hat on.
To that discussion, you know, I've been meeting with the town manager, town administrators in area towns and, you know, I was talking particularly into Holden, who was really upset with this budget process because they effectively told the school committee or the school administration that the most they could increase their budget by was $1 million. And the first iteration of the school budget had them at $2.3 million increase. Then I was told by Peter, the town manager, that, you know, well, we're definitely not going to go over $1.5 million. If we do, we're going to fight. And in the last iteration of the school budget, it had Holden down to $1.7 million. So the question is, how much are you going to fight for that additional $200,000 above where they were at? Because the Board of Selectmen and the town manager was kind of gearing up for that fight, and I haven't talked to them since. So I'm sort of curious to see, because they were, I think, the new member of the team, because I guess as I understand it, Paxton and Rutland has always been on one side of trying to vote stuff down, and Holden's never been there. And for the first year, Holden was kind of lined up for that. But I will revisit meetings with all of the selectmen and managers to see where everybody is at now, to see if there's any chance that the other towns are really going to fight at their town meetings. And I'll let the board know after I have that information.
Yeah,
I'd
but in
really like
the
to
end,
know how
Ron,
Sterling is.
we can all sit here and we can all agree, we can all sit with all 5 towns in a room and we can all agree that we're against it. But in the end, it's the taxpayers that make the decision, not us.
And that's the problem I got even from Peter. When I first met with Peter, Peter would say, you know what? The Board of Selectmen and I went against the school budget, but then all the teachers joined into the town meeting and they just blew us away and we couldn't win. Sort of the same message I got in Rutland. So you're absolutely correct. Even if all the managers agree, the Board of Selectmen agree, if the school system turns out the teachers, they win at town meeting, it's off or not.
That's what you have to go and stop in the future. It ain't happening this year.
So, all right, so I'll entertain a motion to adjourn if there are no more questions.
Karen, I had one other
Yep.
question.
Go ahead.
Ron, you sent us an email this afternoon with a file called Budget Deficit Reductions.
Yep.
Yep.
And I just want to make sure I'm reading that correctly. Are we at a slightly better position looking at $624,515 deficit as of today?
The answer is yes. If you remember when I presented the town administrator's presentation, it was $1,095,000 deficit.
Correct.
And what I've been doing is kind of working through things that I could possibly change. I worked with the town assessor to increase the new growth to 418,000. If you remember, it was originally, I think, 325. So that gave us some extra revenue, which helped a little bit. The school committee reduced their assessment from, I think it was 961 down to about 679.
But everyone, please remember, that's using ESSER 2 funds.
Right.
74,000 of that is not a reduction. It's using our one-time revenues of about $74,000 of ESSER 2 funds.
And Karen is absolutely correct. The school administration took it upon themselves to automatically say that all ESSER 2 funds would reduce their budget, and that has not yet been approved by the legislature. So Karen's right, there's that 90-something thousand portion of that. I think it was a $300-something thousand cut that is still somewhat up for debate. So yeah, the answer is yes. We're in better position, but we got a long way to go, Ted. And there's another issue that I don't know if I sent it out to you yet, but I've been trying to think about it. I sent you guys the free cash number of what we have left. I think it's about 120,000 that's left, right? So one of the things that I know we have to do in some manner is we have to fix the roof on the Woods building before it damages the interior structure of that building. We think that's going to be about 30 grand. So again, I'm not saying this is ironclad or what we do, but I'm just telling you that I've been thinking about how we get to where we need to be, right? So let's assume we took the 20 grand, there's 120 grand of free cash. We took 20 grand and maybe find 10 grand, and I don't even know if it's there. I haven't looked at the capital stabilization for 10, and that would take care of the roof, leaving us $100,000 of free cash. We could, in theory, do what you guys have done in the past, at least use $100,000 in free cash to offset some of that deficit in the 2022 budget. Now, me and Karen were debating a little bit that free cash is normally, as part of your history, used to pay the snow and ice deficit, which I think is about 70 grand if I sent you guys that number.
75, he said.
75 grand. So what we would have to do, and I had a conversation with Dan Hayes, and again, I'm looking for every possible way to do stuff, is if we can, when we get to the end of fiscal year 21, we do transfers of funds to make the budget balanced. So if we had excesses in various town accounts, I'm hoping that we can use those excesses. For instance, the reserve of 25 grand has not been used to pay the snow and ice deficit from 2021 funds. That would allow us to use the free cash, the 100,000 in the 2022 budget deficit. Does that make sense to you? So I'm looking for ways to make this budget balanced and trying to find ways that I can help us for every revenue, because I know in the end, and I'll be blatantly honest to this committee, I think it's gonna be extremely tough to cut $400,000 or $500,000 from the town side of the budget. So I truthfully, I think it's damn near impossible without severely damaging town services. So I'm doing everything in my power to find ways that we can do this responsibly.
Go ahead, Ted.
So that current deficit number, 624,000 and some change. Is it possible and would it be beneficial to itemize out where that deficit's coming from?
Well, I think,
Well, hold on a second, Ron.
Yep.
So one of the things that Ron put in there was, in the budget, Becky said that they had thought that the health insurance was going to come in at a higher amount. So that's not truly a deficit. We're now adjusting the budget down to where it actually is. So that's not a deficit reduction. I mean, it is, but it isn't. We're going to have to make the change in the budget, because a deficit reduction are things, to me, deficit reduction are things that we're cutting that we can tell the taxpayers, this is what we had to cut to get there, not the things that we found that we were told it was going to be 8%. It came in at, 6 point whatever, and it could go down to 0.93. Those are true reductions. They are savings that we made from the original budget, but they're not reductions.
so let's explain that, because Karen's kind of partially right on that, but let me explain what she's saying. So everything in the town budget that I gave you in the town budget presentation was based on the best numbers we had at that time. Just like Joe changed his budget tonight because he got different numbers that were lower. But at the time that I presented you the budget, the deficit was the difference between revenues and expenditures, right? At that time. That was $1,095,000. When I'm referring to deficit reduction, I'm looking at all the numbers that change from the time of that date to what we do when we go through this whole budget process. So since then, the insurance rate has dropped, because at the time that I was showing you the $1,095,000 deficit, the insurance rate was up at like 9% and it's got lowered. So that is a reduction in the deficit on that date that I showed it to you, right? So that's what I'm trying to demonstrate. Also, for instance, the AIC is considering changing the deductibles for health insurance. That might save us another $30,000. So that's a reduction that wasn't planned on, that we got, that's part of reducing the deficit. But to Karen's point, I mean, I don't know, everything in the budget in my mind is kind of an estimate in the beginning. And you reduce it as part of trying to make it balance from revenues and expenses. So I think I understand her point, but I'm not kind of doing it the way she's thinking. I'm looking at the deficit as of that date to, our goal now is get that deficit to be zero in my mind.
Go ahead, Ted.
So I might not have phrased my question correctly, but is it possible to take that $624,000 and say that deficit and say 200,000 of that is for X and another 100,000 of it is for Y and another is for Z?
So here's some of the answer, Ted, if you wanted to try to allocate that way. The first $405,000 would effectively from not balancing the budget with ongoing revenues last year. So that,
Okay, I remember that. Yep.
that'd be the first 405 of that. And then you could argue that a big part of the deficit is, I gotta be careful how I say this. The instead of saying outrageous, I'm gonna say the too high of number in the increase in terms of the education budget. Because whenever you raise a budget, keep in mind, the school budget went up only by 3%, right? But it's 3% of a huge number. So that's how you got, the 679 grand. Now remember, even though the budget went up 3% in the school system, because the state of Massachusetts cut their budget by $1 million, we're picking up that extra 3%, not the state, right? So it really went up by more because they lost $1 million in revenues on their side of the budget, right? So it's really not a 3% increase total budget. It's way more than that, because you would have to add in the $1 million that was cut from state funds. So could I say, yeah, there's about $100,000 of that deficit you could say is because our pension costs went up by 100 grand, or Bay Path went up by 104,000. But those aren't, you could take any expense and kind of allocate it to that deficit. Who knows which one caused it? We do know the large increase is the school budget. That's what we do know, the education side. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I guess in one of the things that I'm kind of trying to work out in my brain is if if X was responsible for 100,000 of it, is that an increase that's more or less than the 2.5% that we are held to by Proposition 2.5? So that if we itemized it out and said, this part is within that, this part is not, this part is not, that to me might help a voter wrap their head around some of this.
So to that angle, if you wanted to go that approach, obviously the first 405 is still the deficit from last year. The school budget went way up in terms of numbers from the 2.5% that we could get under the tax levy, right? So that blows it apart. Bay Path went up by more than 2.5% because we got 11 new students at Bay Path. So that went up higher. The pension number went up significantly higher because they actually have a 20-year schedule to pay for unfunded liability from past years. So those are just some of the target areas if you want to highlight targeted areas, yes.
Okay. Thank you. Sorry for taking so long with that, but it helped me wrap my head around it a
It's a
little.
very good question, Ted. So I know that Barbara's running it.
That was a great question, Ted. Help me with it, because I wasn't getting it.
Okay, can I get a motion to adjourn?
I'll move that we adjourn.
Pete makes the motion to adjourn, second.
Second.
Tommy seconded, roll call vote. Darren,
Ross, aye.
Ted,
Purcell, aye.
David,
Lucy.
Your eye.
Pete,
O'Malley, aye.
Tommy,
Control I.
and Karen, aye. It's unanimous. We are adjourned as of 7:09 PM. Thanks, everybody. We'll see you.